do first is, can you just slate your name, your full name?
Can I what? Sorry.
Can you just like say your full name?
Say my full name?
Mm-hmm.
Marc, M-A-R-C, middle initial A, Pressel, P-R-E-S-S-E-L.
All right. Awesome. Does it sound good, Cal? Awesome. All right. And then can we close
Sure.
the door? Thank you so much.
There is a slight hearing problem.
Okay. Okay. So, let's get started. So it says here that you came from Belgium.
That's right.
So, can you tell me a little bit about? Because I'm assuming like you had most of your childhood was in Belgium.
Not much of it. I think I was there until I was about 6 or 7, 6. And then the Second World War came by and sort of changed the whole outlook because we were chased out by the war. Uh, the day we left, the Germans were a few miles away, and we had to really scamper to get out with for our lives. So that was, I only had a few years, not enough, I feel. I wished I would have had more time there, but it was what it was.
And you traveled, like when you left Belgium, it looked like you traveled around Europe.
We went from Belgium. Well, what happened was my father, in his infinite patriotic unwisdom, gave away our car, and so we had no way to get out of Antwerp. That's where I was born. And so what we did is somehow, I don't know, my mother or my father were able to pick up another car on the fly, and so we packed whatever few belongings we could, and then drove to France. And I remember on my brilliant way there, I had the verve to tell my parents, let's go to Paris because I want to see Paris. This is a 6-year-old idiot child talking, and not having any idea of what the true consequences of what was happening in Europe at the time. So obviously we didn't go to Paris, but we went to Rouen on the beach, waiting for passage to England. And there we were nicely bombed by the Luftwaffe as well, because that was in France. And so we bided our time to be able to get to London. And so that's part of the story, and that's where I'll leave you at this point in France.
Was it more of like you were able to leave like on your own accord? I mean, I know there were instances that you had to leave, but you weren't like being like rushed out of your home.
Well, as Jews, my father was wise enough to realize that if we stayed, we were going to be massacred, and so we certainly wanted to try and join our family in America, and so that was what we were trying to do, is to get visas to get to the USA. But the easiest way to do that was to get through to England at the time, which seemed a safer place to go, which in the long run was not so safe because, excuse me, at the time that we got there, Hitler decided to do the Blitz, which was to go over and bomb the people of London every night. And so we had to go into the shelters, and the shelters were what's known as the underground, well, as the equivalent of the subway here in New York City. And so we had to not hide ourselves, but go into the underground every night, because that's when the Luftwaffe would come and bomb London. And that was Hitler's way of trying to bomb England into surrendering, because he wanted to have England as a prize and wanted to invade England. And this was a softening up process of, getting the morale of the people totally wiped out because of these bombings, which never helped. We used to sing "There'll Always Be an England" in the shelters, as I recall. And the people of England never faltered. And of course, with Winston Churchill as the Prime Minister, certainly helped. But anyway, that was it. And I remember playing in the park, Regent's Park, which is a beautiful park in the center of London, sort of an equivalent to Central Park. Uh, Beautiful park. And the bombings were so severe that stones came up through the grass. They were heaved up on some basis. And so, I mean, and there was glass all over the streets. It was a mess. And you'd hear the sirens and the planes and the guns and the bombs, and it was madness at the time. Hard for two young children. I had a brother with me, myself, my brother, and my parents, and we did the best we could under the circumstances, as did the rest of England, and it's not ourselves, of course, the rest of Londoners who were wonderful, brave people uh, doing this with the odds of having these horrible planes coming over and just throwing bombs down willy-nilly. So that was pretty bad.
You said because you were so young, you were 6 years old when this was happening, and you had mentioned, oh, let's go to Paris. You know,
Oh,
like
yeah.
you didn't realize like how bad it was. Like,
Totally.
did you come to realize just like how bad it was, or was it still like you didn't realize the significance? 'Cause you
No,
were
I
still
didn't
too
realize
young?
it. I was a total naive child. Uh, but Paris sounded wonderful. And recently I did get my wish, because I did go to Paris. Because I, certainly with the advent of Woody Allen's movie Midnight in Paris, which I cannot help but see over and over again because I love it. And it just is, you see the essence of Paris at night, and it's so beautiful. And some shots, day shots as well. But I went to Paris and then went on a riverboat trip down the Seine to Normandy, and wanted to be back in France because I wanted to see France as I'd originally wanted to see it as a child and see Paris. And now I still have another goal, is just to be in Paris for at least a week, because the town is utterly beautiful, and it's magical. It's just wonderful. And as corny as it was, I thought I would never go up the Eiffel Tower. I said, oh, who wants to go to that tourist trap? Well, sure enough, went up the Eiffel Tower. It was absolutely wonderful. And to see Paris from that vantage point was just wonderful. And it gives you the spirit of Paris. And that the fact that they built that tower, God knows how many years ago, before the 1900s, I believe. And it was wonderful. So back to Paris, that's still a dream, which will become a reality.
So it seems like you were born in Europe, but you lived a majority of your life out here.
Right.
Do you ever think you would want to go back, or
Well,
or at any point in your life did you figure you'd want to go back, like once the mayhem kind of?
I wouldn't mind living
So-
what they call sort of not bi-coastal, as that means with LA, but bi-continental, I guess, would be an interesting life if I could do it, to live maybe 6 months of the year in Europe and 6 months of the year in the States. Because, I mean, the USA it's an unbelievable country, and I love it here. You know, it's a fantastic place. But it's still something to be said for France and for Europe in general. It's, you know, because you want to discover that, not you, but I want to still discover places. Like I do want to go to Italy, which is another dream which shall come true. That as a goal that I have to make happen. And I did learn to speak Italian. I went to the University of Miami, and I studied Italian for a semester or two with Madame Acecci. And she was one of the most stimulating, energetic teachers I'd ever met in my life, and she made you love the language. And it's a beautiful language, Italian, too. So since I speak French reasonably well, and I can get through a little bit of Italian, it certainly is a help. And they're related because they're both Romance languages, so it's something that I feel I want to do, and should do it with ease, and just be dropped into Italy, zoom, and enjoy the music, the food, the people, and the culture. So it would be something that would be fun to do.
Sounds great. You had mentioned that you had already had family out here when
Mhm.
you were trying to come to the U.S.
Yes.
So what was the process like of finally being able to get here, and how old were you? Like how long did that take?
The process was that and I believe it's still in force, is you cannot be a ward of the state. In other words, you can't come here and say plead poverty and have them pay for your health and all your needs. You've got to have somebody that's willing to pony up the cash to make sure that you are safe and sound and healthy, and that the USA doesn't have to pay for your keep. And so we had a family that was well established here. They had been a little bit more astute than my father had been as far as the circumstances that were happening in Europe. As you know, that Hitler came to power, the National Socialist Party came to power in 1933 or 1932, I believe. And so all hell was breaking loose in Europe. And so they had left. In fact, my grandmother came over on the Normandy, of all wonderful boats. And so they were well established here in business. My family was in the diamond business, and they had done reasonably well, and had offices on 47th Street in Manhattan. And my father was a diamond broker as well, because the family was in the diamond business. My grandfather had had a diamond factory in Brussels, so the family had been established in that business. So they were able to vouch for us, and so we finally left London because of the bombings, and went to live in Wales in a town called Brecon. And it was a sheep farming area. And so you had farmers and sheep, and it was safe because there were no targets for the Luftwaffe to bomb. And we'd see some dogfights in the air. Sometimes there would be some fighter planes, but it was safe. And we went to a place called Christ College. And that was, college there means like middle school or junior school or something like that. And my brother and I were the only Jews in the whole college. And they treated us just beautifully. It was just a wonderful experience. And by immersion, we learned to speak English. And when I came to this country, we both had English accents. Hard to believe. It's unfortunate that we have changed since. But anyway, so we went to school there, which was wonderful. And would take walks in the country and the farm roads, and it was absolutely wonderful. And we waited there for our visas until we could get to the United States. And so we bided our time. And finally they came through. And then we went to Glasgow, Scotland, for a ship called the Warwick Castle II, which was, I think, all of 25,000 or 30,000 tons. When you think of the boats today, the liners like the Princess Cruise ships, which are 100,000 tons, it's a tiny ship. But anyway, we made the crossing on that boat up through the Arctic Circle, away from the wolf packs, the submarine wolf packs of the German Navy, to be safe, and landed in Newfoundland, in St. John's, Newfoundland, and then took a train or somehow got to New York. And strangely enough, I had the measles, and somehow the officials didn't pick it up, and so we were admitted, and we were able to go straight to New York City and to our family. So that's how the long drawn-out trip. The ironic part was that boat, the Warwick Castle II, on its way back to Europe, was sunk. Talk about luck. So we were very, very lucky. Very lucky.
So you said you had the measles. Isn't that like, at the time, wasn't there no proper medicine or anything to like help you with that?
You know, something I don't know. I have no idea. But I think the measles is just something that's a childhood disease that runs its course. I don't think there's anything you can do with it. Certainly at that time we didn't have the medicines that we have today, the techniques that we have at the present time. So it might have been a bit more dangerous at the time than it is today. Today I think you're vaccinated against it to begin with anyway. I'm pretty sure. So that's a different story. But we were lucky, somehow got snuck past and got to New York, and here I am, measles free.
your transition, because you already had family here that was very well established.
Mm.
Was that did that help make the transition for your family specifically easier, or was it still hard because you're coming from a completely different country?
Metza metza, as they say. Uh, the transition was made a lot easier because the family could show us the ropes, so to speak, as far as Manhattan was concerned, because that's where they lived, uh, and that's where I grew up in Manhattan, and it was truly wonderful. I mean, it was a great place to grow up because of the everything that's offered there, culturally speaking. It was just heaven because uh, my parents were uh, culturally motivated. They both became painters, not for work, but because they were interested in the arts, and they were interested in music and drama and ballet and everything like that, and the museums. And so I went all over with them. I mean, I used to go to the Metropolitan Museum and to the Museum of Natural History and to the Frick Museum. There used to be free concerts there. The Budapest String Quartet used to play there for free. I mean, here's a world-class string quartet, and they had instruments. They had Stradivarius instruments that were loaned to them by the Congress of the United States. They had a quartet of Stradivarius instruments, and they would play there, and it was magnificent. And so I was exposed to all sorts of wonderful cultural activities. I used to go to the Philharmonic with my mother a lot as a kid. And I think she wanted me to become a musician. The story she told me was when she was pregnant with me, she used to go to a lot of concerts in the hopes that it would be influential somehow. And it worked. I mean, it did happen to come out that way because that's what I became later in my life, was a major concentration of my life. But anyway, in answer to your question more directly, yes, it did make it much easier. The transition to certain American genre like baseball and hockey and stuff and football, I mean, no, that took a little while for my brother and myself because, I mean, we didn't know what the heck baseball was, and it's a truly American art form of the sport. But eventually we got it, and I got my own glove, used to pound my pocket, and used to play in the park and played football, and we learned by doing and learning and being exposed. So it was a great time. It was a wonderful time.
Were both of your parents very influenced by music, or was it mainly your mom?
I would say mainly my mom, but my father too loved music as well, and he used to hum a little bit. So he had certain classical pieces that he liked a lot, and so he would hum those every once in a while. So they both, I mean, they did love music. There was no doubt about that, and they had, you know, mainly classical music. Uh, so, and I would say that I was probably more open to. When I went to the movies, I loved the music that was composed for the movies, and thought at an early age that I would like to compose for the movies or for that genre, because I thought the movies were just fantastic. That's brilliant, wonderful soundtracks. I mean, when you think of and even today, I listen to the soundtrack of movies and think of how fantastic they are. But that's because you've got fantastic musicians and you've got great arrangers and composers out in Hollywood and all over the world, in England and in France as well as Italy. So I maybe was a little bit more broad-minded than my parents, or more exposed, possibly. But they were good. I once dragged them. I learned about the opera Carmen in school. I said, dragged them to see a performance of Carmen. I said, you got to see this opera. This thing is really good. And it is good. It's full of hit tunes, and a wonderful opera by Bizet. So they were quite open, and they used to take me to the ballet when I was a kid, and I loved it. Great music, beautiful dancing, and so it was a great opportunity. We used to go to the Ballet Russe which is no more, unfortunately, and the American Ballet, and I don't know if I ever saw the Nutcracker with them, but used to go to City Center Ballet a lot, and it was eye-opening for me as a child. I don't mean just eye-opening physically, but emotionally and culturally, to be able to see and hear all this wonderful music. So it had a big influence on me.
Yeah, I was about to say, it seems like music has been the one big passion consistently throughout your life.
Totally, totally. And when I got here, I had started piano lessons in Europe, in Belgium, and I have the ability to carry a tune and to memorize and to hear music within myself. So when I got here, we started lessons again with a piano teacher, and she was very thorough. She gave me not only the technique of piano playing, that's not music, that's mechanics. It reminds me of this story, very short story, I won't take up much of your time. This soprano comes to the maestro and she says, to audition, and she says, "Maestro," she says, "shall I sing for pitch? Shall I sing for technique? Shall I sing for drama? Shall I sing for emotions? Shall I sing?" She lists all these things, and what he said to her, he says, "Get out." Because that's what you're supposed to sing for. The whole thing, the whole package is supposed to be wrapped up in a performance. And if you don't know what to sing for, you're totally worthless. You have no conception of what music is all about. This music is everything. First of all, you have to have technique. If you don't have technique, go home and go practice and leave me alone and don't waste my time, is what, everybody should say. And I'm very judgmental about that. But no, that's practicality. If you can't get it out, you have no way of communicating what you need to say. You have to have a means of communicating. It's like somebody who wants to write a great novel and has a pen that has no ink in it. You're not going to get any place. So you have to have technique, and then it's how you use that technique and how you communicate with the audience. It's wonderful. Now they have this wonderful Jennifer Holliday who's going to be on Broadway. She's that wonderful singer who did Dreamgirls, and she's got it all. She's got the technique, she's got the emotion, she's got the ability to really communicate with you and bring out an emotion within you. And that's what we're talking about. And that's a great performer. Anyway, I digress, as the comedians say.
Cut. Mark, do you mean Jennifer Hudson?